There was a moment, just a few seconds long, when Susan believed her life had finally begun again. It didn't feel like a risk. It didn't feel like a mistake. It felt like hope. And that is exactly why it worked. Because 5 months later, Susan would empty her savings, borrow money she never planned to borrow, and realize something that would stay with her for the rest of her life. The man she trusted, the man she believed she loved, the man who said he was fighting for his country, was never real. Susan Miller was 64 years old. She lived alone in a small town in Pennsylvania, a quiet place, tree-lined streets, familiar faces, the kind of town where people recognize each other at the grocery store, the kind of town where life moves slowly. After her husband passed away, that quiet became something else. Not peaceful, lonely, very lonely. Her husband, Robert, had died 3 years earlier. A sudden heart condition. No warning. One moment they were planning a weekend trip. The next, everything stopped. And when loss happens like that, it doesn't just remove a person. It removes routine, conversation, meaning. Susan tried to stay strong. She kept her schedule: morning coffee, afternoon walks, evening television. But routines don't replace people, and loneliness doesn't arrive loudly. It settles quietly, in empty chairs, in silent rooms, in the moments when there is no one to talk to. Over time, Susan began to feel something she hadn't expected. Not just sadness, but absence. The absence of being seen. The absence of being heard. The absence of connection. One evening, her daughter suggested something. "Mom, maybe you should try Facebook." Susan laughed at first. The idea felt unnecessary. But later that night, she thought about it again. Maybe it wouldn't hurt. Just to see. Just to connect. So she created an account. At first, it was simple. Photos, family updates, messages from old friends. Nothing unusual, nothing risky. But something important was happening. She was becoming visible again. And visibility creates opportunity. A few weeks later, Susan received a message. "Hello, Susan. I hope you don't mind me reaching out." The sender's name was Daniel Harris. His profile picture showed a man in uniform. U.S. Army. Late 50s. Strong posture. Calm expression. His profile described him as a military officer stationed overseas. Widowed. Working on a long-term assignment. The details felt specific. Believable. Respectable. But what mattered most was how he spoke. Not said aggressively. Not overly romantic. Just respectful. "I saw your profile," he wrote. "You seem like a kind person." That sentence mattered. Because kindness is something people want to be seen for. Susan hesitated. then replied. And that small reply changed everything. Over the next few days, their conversations became regular. Morning messages. How did you sleep? Afternoon check-ins. How is your day going? Evening conversations. Sometimes short, sometimes long. Daniel asked about her life, her family, her past, and he listened carefully. He remembered details, small details, things Susan had not even realized she mentioned, and that made her feel something unexpected, important, because being remembered feels like being valued. Within 2 weeks, Daniel became part of her daily life, a routine, a presence, someone who made the day feel less empty. Then one evening, Daniel shared something personal. My wife passed away 5 years ago. Susan paused, because she understood that pain, loss recognizes loss. And in that moment, something shifted. The connection became deeper, more emotional, more personal, or at least, it felt real. At first, everything felt natural. Nothing rushed, nothing forced. Just conversation. But something subtle was happening. Daniel was becoming part of Susan's emotional routine. Every morning, his message arrived. Good morning, Susan. I hope today brings you peace. She would read it slowly, sometimes more than once, because those words did something important. They filled the silence, and silence had been the hardest part of her life since Robert passed away. Over time, those messages became something she expected, something she looked forward to, something that made her feel less alone. Weeks passed, and the conversations deepened. Daniel asked questions that felt meaningful. What made you happiest in your life? What do you miss the most? What do you wish you could experience again? These weren't casual questions. They were emotional. And emotional questions create emotional bonds. Susan found herself sharing things she hadn't talked about in years. Memories of her husband, moments from her past, feelings she usually kept to herself. Daniel listened, always calmly, always attentively, always with the right response. I understand. That must have been difficult. You're stronger than you think. Those words mattered, because they made Susan feel seen. And when people feel seen, they begin to trust. About a month into their conversations, Susan asked something simple. Can we talk on the phone sometime? It felt natural. The next step. Daniel responded quickly. I would love that. Then came the hesitation. But the signal here is very unstable. Unstable. Another soft explanation. Not a refusal. Just a delay. He explained that he was stationed in a remote area. Limited connection. Restricted communication. Video calls were unreliable. Phone calls often disconnected. But messages always worked. At the time, it made sense. Because military deployments are often complicated, difficult environments, unpredictable conditions. So Susan accepted it, without questioning further. And that is how trust grows. Quietly, without resistance. Daniel began sending photos. Him in uniform. Him near what looked like military equipment. Him in locations that appeared distant, foreign. Everything looked real. Very real. But something important was missing. There were no videos, no live calls, no real-time interaction, only images. And images can be controlled. Susan didn't think about that, because she didn't want to, because everything else felt right. Then something changed. The tone of the messages. They became warmer, more personal, more emotional. I feel like I've known you forever. You bring peace into my life. I don't think this happened by chance. Those words. They create something powerful. Connection. But also dependency. Because once someone becomes emotionally important, their presence begins to matter more. 2 months later, Daniel sent a message that stopped Susan completely. I think I'm falling in love with you. Susan stared at the screen, her heart beating slightly faster, because part of her already knew. She had felt it, but she hadn't said it. Not out loud, not even to herself. Love after loss feels different, more fragile, more uncertain, but also more meaningful, because it feels like a second chance, and second chances are rare. Susan hesitated, because saying it back would make it real, but the truth was already there. So she replied, I think I feel the same way. And just like that, everything changed. This was no longer just conversation. It was a relationship, an emotional one, a committed one. Even without meeting, even without hearing his voice. And that is where the real risk begins. Because once emotions take control, logic takes a step back. And when logic steps back, people stop asking the questions that matter most. Over the next few weeks, Daniel began talking about the future, not in a dramatic way. Slowly, carefully, he mentioned returning home, meeting in person, starting something real, a life together, simple things, walking together, cooking together, living together. Susan began to imagine it, a life without loneliness, a life with connection again, a life that felt full. And slowly, that imagined future became something she believed in. And belief is where everything changes. The shift began quietly, almost unnoticeable. At first, it was just a small change in tone. One morning, Daniel didn't send his usual message. No good morning. No check-in. No presents. Hours passed. Susan checked her phone. Again and again. Nothing. The silence felt different. Heavier. More noticeable. Because when someone becomes part of your routine, their absence feels like something is missing. Late that afternoon, a message finally appeared. Susan, I'm sorry. Today has been difficult. Her heart tightened immediately. What happened? She asked. There was a delay. Longer than usual. Then the message came. There's a problem here. Problem. Another simple word, but powerful, because it creates concern. Daniel explained that something had gone wrong with his deployment. A logistics issue. Equipment delays. Complications that required immediate resolution. The explanation sounded technical, detailed enough to feel real, but not clear enough to fully understand. And that matters, because confusion often leads to trust. People rely on others when they don't understand something themselves. Susan read the message carefully. Daniel sounded stressed, not panicked, not desperate, just strained, and that made it believable. Over the next few days, the situation appeared again in conversation. Small mentions. Still dealing with it. Trying to resolve everything. I don't like situations like this. Then one evening, the tone changed. It became more direct. Susan, I hate asking for help. That sentence matters, because it prepares the listener. It lowers resistance. It makes what comes next feel difficult, even for the person asking. Susan felt it immediately. What do you need? She asked. There was a pause. Then the message appeared. I'm short on funds to complete a payment. Short on funds. Again. Simple. Carefully chosen. Not dramatic. Not overwhelming. Just enough to create concern. Susan sat quietly, reading the message again. Daniel was overseas. Alone. In a difficult situation. And now, he was asking her for help. He continued. It's temporary. I will repay you when I return. Temporary. That word makes risk feel smaller. Manageable. Safe. Then came the number. $3,000. Susan felt a small hesitation. 3,000 wasn't nothing, but it also wasn't everything. She had savings, carefully built over years. And this was someone she trusted, someone she cared about, someone she believed she loved. That combination is powerful. Emotion, trust, hope. Together, they override logic. Susan hesitated, just for a moment, because something inside her, very quietly, felt uncertain. But that feeling didn't last, because Daniel sent another message. I understand if it's not possible. That sentence removes pressure. And when pressure disappears, people feel more comfortable saying yes. Susan typed slowly. I can help. And just like that, the first step was taken. The money was sent the next morning. Daniel's response was immediate. "Thank you, Susan. You don't know what this means to me." His tone became warmer, more affectionate, more connected. "I don't know what I would do without you." Gratitude reinforces decisions. It makes actions feel right. And that is how the cycle begins. Because once someone helps once, helping again becomes easier. Days passed. Everything seemed normal again. The routine returned. Connection. Future plans. But something had changed. A line had been crossed. And once that line is crossed, it becomes easier to cross it again. 2 weeks later, another message arrived. "Susan, I hate to say this." And in that moment, the pattern repeated. The shift began quietly, almost unnoticeable. At first, it was just a small change in tone. One morning, Daniel didn't send his usual message. No good morning. No check-in. No presents. Hours passed. Susan checked her phone. Again and again. Nothing. The silence felt different. Heavier. More noticeable. Because when someone becomes part of your routine, their absence feels like something is missing. Late that afternoon, a message finally appeared. "Susan, I'm sorry. Today has been difficult." Her heart tightened immediately. "What happened?" she asked. There was a delay, longer than usual. Then the message came. "There's a problem here." Problem. Another simple word, but powerful, because it creates concern. Daniel explained that something had gone wrong with his deployment. A logistics issue. Equipment delays. Complications that required immediate resolution. The explanation sounded technical, detailed enough to feel real, but not clear enough to fully understand. And that matters, because confusion often leads to trust. People rely on others when they don't understand something themselves. Susan read the message carefully. Daniel sounded stressed, not panicked, not desperate, just strained. And that made it believable. Over the next few days, the situation appeared again in conversation. Small mentions. Still dealing with it. Trying to resolve everything. I don't like situations like this. Then one evening, the tone changed. It became more direct. "Susan, I hate asking for help." That sentence matters, because it prepares the listener. It lowers resistance. It makes what comes next feel difficult, even for the person asking. Susan felt it immediately. "What do you need?" she asked. There was a pause. Then the message appeared. "I'm short on funds to complete a payment." Short on funds. Again. Simple. Carefully chosen. Not dramatic. Not overwhelming. Just enough to create concern. Susan sat quietly, reading the message again. Daniel was overseas, alone, in a difficult situation. And now, he was asking her for help. He continued, "It's temporary. I will repay you when I return." Temporary. That word makes risk feel smaller, manageable, safe. Then came the number. $3,000. Susan felt a small hesitation. 3,000 wasn't nothing, but it also wasn't everything. She had savings, carefully built over years. And this was someone she trusted, someone she cared about, someone she believed she loved. That combination is powerful. Emotion, trust, hope. Together, they override logic. Susan hesitated, just for a moment, because something inside her, very quietly, felt uncertain. But that feeling didn't last, because Daniel sent another message. "I understand if it's not possible." That sentence removes pressure, and when pressure disappears, people feel more comfortable saying yes. Susan typed slowly, "I can help." And just like that, the first step was taken. The money was sent the next morning. Daniel's response was immediate. "Thank you, Susan. You don't know what this means to me." His tone became warmer, more affectionate, more connected. "I don't know what I would do without you." Gratitude reinforces decisions. It makes actions feel right, and that is how the cycle begins. Because once someone helps once, helping again becomes easier. Days passed. Everything seemed normal again. The routine returned. Connection. Future plans. But something had changed. A line had been crossed. And once that line is crossed, it becomes easier to cross it again. 2 weeks later, another message arrived. "Susan, I hate to say this." And in that moment, the pattern repeated. The second request came faster. Too fast. But Susan didn't say that out loud. She only felt it. A quiet discomfort. A small hesitation. But hesitation is easy to ignore when emotions are strong. "Susan, I am close to fixing everything." Close. That word creates hope. Resolution. An ending. But then came the next sentence. "There's just one final issue." Susan felt her chest tighten slightly, because now she understood the pattern. Another problem. Another request. Another step forward. Daniel explained that the situation had become more complicated. Additional fees. Clearance issues. Administrative delays. The explanation was longer this time. More detailed. More technical. And that made it feel real. Because complexity creates credibility. People trust what they don't fully understand. Susan read every line slowly, trying to follow the explanation, trying to make sense of it. But one part stood out clearly. "I just need a little more to finish this." A little more. That phrase is dangerous because it suggests the end is near. The problem is almost solved. "How much?" Susan asked. The answer came immediately. 6,000. Susan leaned back in her chair. 9,000 total. Then 15. The numbers were growing. And now, they were becoming difficult to ignore. This wasn't a small favor anymore. This was serious. Very serious. Susan hesitated longer this time. Her thoughts moved in two directions. One voice said to, "This doesn't feel right." The other said, "He needs you." And the second voice was stronger. Because it was emotional. And emotional decisions often win. Daniel sent another message. "I hate putting you in this position." Again. No pressure. Just understanding. And that makes it harder to refuse. Then he added something new. "When I come back, everything will change." That sentence mattered. Because it wasn't about money anymore. It was about the future. A shared future. A life together. And for someone who had lived with loneliness, that promise felt powerful. Susan asked a question. "When will you be back?" The answer came quickly. "Soon." Not a date. Not a plan. Just sin. Vague answers are easy to overlook when trust is high. And Susan trusted him deeply. So she made the decision. Again. She sent the money. $6,000. Another transfer. Another step deeper. Daniel's response was immediate. "You are everything to me. I can't wait to hold you." The language changed. It became more intense, more emotional, more and that matters. Because when someone speaks about physical presence, it makes the relationship feel real, even when it isn't. Over the next few weeks, the conversations became even more personal. Daniel talked about living together, about marriage, about building a life, and Susan began to believe it. Not just imagine it, believe it. Then one night, a message arrived that felt different again. More foods, more serious. "Susan, everything depends on this." Everything. That word carries weight. Finality. Importance. And in that moment, Susan felt something she hadn't felt before. Fear. Because now, this wasn't just helping. This was something bigger. Something that could change everything. Susan stared at the message. She hadn't opened it yet, but she already knew. Another problem. Another request. Another last time. Her hands felt slightly cold. Not from fear. From something else. Something closer to tension. She opened the message. "Susan, I didn't want it to come to this." That sentence always means something worse is coming. The situation has escalated. Escalated. Another vague word. Another undefined problem. Daniel explained that his situation had become critical. The project was being held. Funds were restricted. Authorities were involved. The explanation was longer than ever before. More complex. More confusing. And inside all those words was the part that mattered. If I can't resolve this now, everything collapses. Everything collapses. Susan felt her chest tighten. Because now, this didn't sound temporary. This sounded final. Then came the number. I need $15,000. Susan froze. 15,000. The number didn't feel real. It felt distant. Too large. Too serious. She read it again. 15,000. She didn't have that kind of money available. Not easily. Not without consequences. Her savings were limited. Carefully built. Protected over years. She typed slowly. I don't have that. The response came quickly. I understand. Again. No pressure. No demand. Just understanding. And that made it harder. Harder to say no. Then came the next message. There may be another way. Susan felt her stomach drop, because she already sensed where this was going. What do you mean? She asked. Daniel answered carefully. A loan. Loan. That word feels different. Less permanent. Less dangerous. Temporary. Manageable. He explained that once everything was resolved, he would repay her immediately. With interest, he added. That detail mattered, because it made the situation feel even more reasonable, more structured, more legitimate. Susan sat in silence. The loan meant commitment. Responsibility. But Daniel added something else. When I come back, we will start our life together. That sentence changed everything. Because now, this wasn't just about money. It was about the future. A shared future. A life that didn't include loneliness. And for someone who had lived in silence for years, that promise felt powerful. Susan stood up slowly. She walked through her house. The living room. The kitchen. The hallway. Each space filled with memories. Her husband. Her past. Her life. And in that moment, she made a decision. Not quickly, but emotionally. She chose hope over caution. She applied for the loan. Days later, it was approved. $15,000. And without hesitation, she sent it. Everything. For a man she had never heard. Susan stared at the message. She hadn't opened it yet, but she already knew. Another problem. Another request. Another last time. Her hands felt slightly cold. Not from fear. From something else. Something closer to tension. She opened the message. Susan, I didn't want it to come to this. That sentence always means something worse is coming. The situation has escalated. Another vague word. Another undefined problem. Daniel explained that his situation had become critical. The project was being held. Funds were restricted. Authorities were involved. The explanation was longer than ever before. More complex. More confusing. And inside all those words was the part that mattered. If I can't resolve this now, everything collapses. Everything collapses. Susan felt her chest tighten. Because now, this didn't sound temporary. This sounded final. Then came the number. I need $15,000. Susan froze. 15,000. The number didn't feel real. It felt distant. Too large. Too serious. She read it again. 15,000. She didn't have that kind of money available. Not easily. Not without consequences. Her savings were limited. Carefully built. Protected over years. She typed slowly. I don't have that. The response came quickly. I understand. Again. No pressure. No demand. Just understanding. And that made it harder. Harder to say no. Then came the next message. There may be another way. Susan felt her stomach drop. Because she already sensed where this was going. What do you mean? She asked. Daniel answered carefully. The loan. Loan. That word feels different. Less permanent. Less dangerous. Temporary. Manageable. He explained that once everything was resolved, he would repay her immediately. With interest, he added. That detail mattered, because it made the situation feel even more reasonable, more structured, more legitimate. Susan sat in silence. A loan meant commitment, responsibility. But Daniel added something else. When I come back, we will start our life together. That sentence changed everything. Because now, this wasn't just about money. It was about the future. A shared future. A life that didn't include loneliness. And for someone who had lived in silence for years, that promise felt powerful. Susan stood up slowly. She walked through her house. The living room. The kitchen. The hallway. Each space filled with memories. Her husband. Her past. Her life. And in that moment, she made a decision. Not quickly, but emotionally. She chose hope over caution. She applied for the loan. Days later, it was approved. $15,000. And without hesitation, she sent it. Everything. For a man she had never heard.